Good evening, everybody. I'm just watching people come in as we get the meeting started. So just give us a couple more seconds and we'll get you started officially here. Really appreciate everybody coming out tonight. It was starting to get a little cloudy here and I thought it might rain. So I'm hoping it holds off at least for a little while we go through our meeting tonight. So looks like most people are coming in and are getting into the Zoom meeting. So this is only our second Zoom meeting we've done for Eagle. So we're kind of excited to have this new platform. As usual, if you have any feedback on it, please feel free to let us know what you thought. This is an information session for Marathon Petroleum and the Detroit Refinery. And this is about the proposed consent order. So this is going to be about an enforcement case tonight. What we're going to be talking about this evening, just to let you know, is we're going to do an introduction of Air Quality Division staff that are going to be on the panel tonight to answer questions for you after a brief presentation. So I'm going to just take a minute to introduce them really quickly. So I'm Jennifer Dixon and I actually work in our Environmental Support Division. We also have Erin Moran. She's going to be doing much of the speaking during the presentation tonight, and she works in our enforcement unit. I also have some other panel members tonight with me. George Acevedo, he is the inspector for the facility and he works out of our Detroit district office. I have Keisha Williams, she works in our toxics unit, so she'll be able to answer questions related to that. Erica Wolf is on and she works in our state implementation plan unit. And Erica, I probably didn't say that quite right, but I think we're talking about rules, non-attainment, things like that. So if you have questions about that, Erica will be able to answer those questions. And then I also have Susan Kilmer with us and she is in our air monitoring unit. So she'll be able to answer questions that you may have about that. So tonight, the way we're going to run this is, this is an information session, so it's not taking public comment on the record this evening, but we want to give you some information about this proposed consent order. So we're going to do a little bit of a presentation. Erin's going to primarily run that, kind of run you through what's happened so far, what we're looking at, and where we're going with that. And then after that, we're going to open it up to question and answer for you. After the question and answer session, I want to go over ways that you can submit an official comment on the record if you want to do that. We'll also talk about where you can find other information about this project. So if you're just coming in and you've only heard a little bit about it, maybe only in the news, but you want more information, we'll talk about where you can find that as well. And then I'll give you some information about who you can contact if you have other questions after this meeting. Okay. So a couple things about tonight is your lines are going to be muted during the meeting, especially during the presentation part, and we are recording this meeting. So if you have to jump off early, then you can definitely watch this on YouTube later on if you feel the need to, or if you just want a review of it before you make a comment or something like that. There's a few ways we're going to talk about to ask a question. The primary way that we would like you to ask your question is to submit your questions in the question and answer box. So you'll find that on the bottom of your Zoom screen. That way you can type in a question, we'll be able to read that question aloud to our panel and get an answer for you. Another thing that we have available for Zoom is even if you are just calling in and you're not actually using the internet and you're just listening to us on the phone right now, you'll be able to raise your hand. So what I wanted to do was try to see if everybody could at least try to raise your hand. So if you're on the computer, you're going to see a little hand icon at the bottom of the screen. And so if you can see that and you can click on it, go ahead. I won't hold you asking any questions right now, obviously. And if you're just calling in on the phone, if you want to type *9 into your phone, that's going to allow you to raise your hand on your phone. So for anybody not familiar in Zoom, this is how we're going to be asking you to be able to speak your question aloud. So we're going to handle the questions that come in the question box first, and then we'll get to people who might want to ask a follow-up question or might feel more comfortable or asking their question aloud. So I'm going to go ahead and lower your hands right now. If you have any issues with what you're hearing or things like that, also feel free to put that in the question box and we'll try to get to it. So I'm going to lower all your hands. So thank you very much for participating in that. And I'm going to pass it over to Erin right now. So panel members, if you guys want to turn your videos off for the presentation part, that's fine. I'll ask you to turn those back on once Erin's done with her presentation. So Erin, you can go ahead and share your screen whenever you are ready.
Okay, thanks, Jen. So good evening, everyone. My name is Erin Moran, and I'm the lead enforcement specialist for this case in the legal settlement with Marathon. And I'm also one of multiple AQD staff that has been involved in this case. So first in this presentation, I'm going to start with an overview of the Air Quality Division and the enforcement process. And after that, I will talk about the proposed consent order. So we all know that pollution comes from many things such as big farms, fuel burning vehicles, and various industrial sources. The overall mission of the Air Quality Division is to protect public health and the environment. The AQD has the authority to do this by regulating industrial sources. So the AQD is separated into different functions. For example, air quality staff monitor levels of air pollutants, look at different toxics to make sure public health is protected, conduct inspections of regulated facilities, and we also review applications and write permits for sources of air pollutants to ensure the operations comply with our rules and regulations. Enforcement falls under the realm of checking for compliance with the rules and permits. So in this slide, I'd like to give you a simple overview of the steps of the enforcement process. What we call escalated enforcement is a legal process by which a company is able to resolve violations with the state of Michigan. This is a flow chart and it shows steps of the enforcement process. So first, a district inspector selects and then visits a company to make sure the company is following the state and federal rules and regulations and also the conditions of their permit. A district inspector can also request and review a company's records. The inspector then evaluates their findings during the inspection or records review. If the inspector finds a violation, then a violation notice is sent to the company to officially let them know that the AQD has found violations and also to give the company a chance to resolve the violations. If the company is not able to resolve the violations in a timely manner, if there are multiple and/or ongoing violations, or if the violation is what is called a high priority violation, the district may send or escalate these violations to enforcement. Once the enforcement unit, and that is where I work, receives the escalated enforcement referral from the district office, we send an enforcement notice to the company. This enforcement notice lets the company know that the violations that the district staff cited in the violation notice will need to be resolved through the legal enforcement process. Next, the enforcement and district staff meet with the company to discuss how the violations will be resolved through the legal process. In a case such as this one with Marathon, the legal agreement is called a consent order. Once AQD staff and the company agree on the terms and conditions of the consent order is posted online for a public notice and comment period. And this is where we are now in the process. The AQD holds a public hearing if one is requested or if the case or company is high profile. For this case with Marathon, we will be holding a public hearing along with another information session before the public hearing on September 2nd. At the public hearing, AQD will take official and on-the-record comments. After the public hearing, the AQD addresses all substantive comments from the public. If there is demand from the public on an item that the AQD is able to change in the consent order, AQD may go back to the company and propose changes to the consent order. If no changes can or will be made, the company and AQD sign the consent order, and then the company is legally required to complete the requirements of the consent order. So next, I'd like to talk about what the goals of AQD's enforcement program are. First, enforcement ensures that state and federal rules and regulations are met to hold violators accountable. If a company violates the rules and regulations that EGLE and AQD are authorized to enforce, then enforcement can be used as a tool to bring the company back into compliance. Second, enforcement serves to level the playing field. This ensures that similar businesses are doing similar compliance actions at their facilities by investing in environmental compliance. A company shouldn't be allowed to gain an economic advantage by not complying with the rules, which may allow them to, for example, sell their product at a better price or avoid costs of environmental compliance, such as purchasing air pollution control equipment. Third, enforcement serves to create a deterrent effect to the regulated community. Any company that creates air emissions must follow the relevant rules and regulations. If these rules and regulations are broken, then EGLE's enforcement divisions can enforce legal actions and fines. So these previous points that I just discussed all work together to compel compliance in the regulated community. Compliance with the rules and regulations is key in protecting public health and the environment. So when can enforcement happen? There are multiple ways that violations can end up being escalated to enforcement. Our district staff are key in monitoring compliance throughout the state. District staff travel to companies and conduct inspections. Any violation observed during an inspection is documented. District staff also respond to complaints received by members of the community and can find and cite violations as a result of a complaint. District staff review test plans and results, monitoring, record keeping, and reporting requirements to check for violations. In the case with Marathon, air quality staff found violations as a result of reviewing test results, by observing violations during inspections at the facility, and also from investigating citizen complaints. Lastly, a company can end up in enforcement by failing to meet their permit requirements or by failing to meet deadlines to come into compliance. So now I will answer some specific questions about the enforcement process. First, what is escalated enforcement? Escalated enforcement is the legal process that we use to resolve the violations that were cited and sent to escalated enforcement. What is a consent order? A consent order is a legally binding contract between the company and the state. It contains a compliance program to resolve alleged air quality violations and prevent future violations, contains a monetary fine, and contains stipulated fines for any future violations of the consent order. A consent order resolves all outstanding violations through the implementation of the compliance plan. Once a company achieves compliance with the compliance program that is written in the consent order, AQD considers the violations to have been resolved. And 90% of the violations that are escalated to enforcement are resolved through a consent order. So now I'm going to move to a discussion of the current settlement. This slide outlines a summary of the different parts of Marathon's proposed consent order, and I'm going to go into more detail about these points in the coming presentation slides. So to give an overall picture, this proposed consent order identifies the violations that AQD found at Marathon. The proposed consent order contains a compliance program which Marathon will be required to follow. The total settlement amount that Marathon will pay is $363,853. Marathon will be required to pay a penalty of $81,853 to the state of Michigan General Fund within 30 days of when the proposed consent order becomes effective. Marathon will also be required to complete 2 supplemental environmental projects and spend a total of $282,000 on these projects. The consent order also includes stipulated fines for any violations of this proposed consent order. So this map shows the locations of the different parts of Marathon's facility in Detroit and Melvindale. So the labels here show the locations, show the locations of the units that are subject to this proposed consent order. Here you can see the locations of the asphalt tank farm, the coker flare, the fluid catalytic cracking unit, and also the crude vacuum heater. And the yellow highway that you can see running from the top right to the bottom left of the map is I-75. So next, I will talk about Marathon's violations that we will be resolving in this proposed consent order. This slide includes a summary of the violations, and then in the following slides, I'll go into more detail about each violation. So overall, Marathon exceeded particulate matter and hydrogen sulfide emission limits. They exceeded visible emission limits, improperly operated certain equipment, and had 3 instances of odor violations, which caused unreasonable interference with comfortable enjoyment of life and property. So the first violations that I will talk about are the emission limit violations. Marathon exceeded the particulate matter emission limit for 2 pieces of equipment, the crude vacuum heater and the coker heater. These particulate matter emission limits are measured during performance tests, which are also called stack tests. While the test result from the crude vacuum heater was a confirmed emission exceedance, the reading for the particulate matter emission exceedance from the coker heater was due to outside contamination during the sample collection. Investigations after the test determined that this test was atypical. Marathon also exceeded the permitted hydrogen sulfide emission limit from the heaters. In this equipment, hydrogen sulfide is measured by a continuous emission monitoring system. Marathon exceeded the hydrogen sulfide emission limit for 3 consecutive hours on October 18, 2017. Marathon also exceeded the visible emission limit from the fluid catalytic cracking unit. This limit was exceeded multiple times in October and November of 2018. So next, I'm going to move into Marathon's violations for improper equipment operation. First, continuous monitoring is required to monitor the hydrogen sulfide level in the refinery gas from the flares. Marathon failed to continuously monitor 2 flares, the unifiner flare and the coker flare, during the 3rd quarter of 2018. Second, Marathon failed to maintain the minimum inlet velocity to the primary internal cyclones of the fluid catalytic cracking unit. Maintaining velocity in this unit is important to prevent visible emissions exceedances. Lastly, Marathon failed to properly combust gases vented to the coker flare. Gases vented to the coker flare are required to be properly combusted in order to reduce emissions of hazardous air pollutants. So now I will discuss the nuisance odor violations that we will be resolving through the proposed consent order. AQD alleges that on 3 occasions, Marathon caused unreasonable interference with the comfortable enjoyment of life and property. So first, I'm going to talk about the odors in the November 25th and December 15th of 2019. And on the next slide, I'm going to go into more detail about the February 2nd through 3rd of 2019 incident. So on November 25th of 2019, asphalt odors were detected beyond Marathon's property line. These nuisance odors were caused by high tank temperatures during asphalt barge loading. On December 15th of 2019, sewage sludge odors were detected beyond Marathon's property line. These nuisance odors were due to the loss of nitrification of the membrane bioreactor at Marathon's wastewater treatment facility. So now I will go into more detail about the incident that occurred on February 2nd and 3rd of 2019. On these dates, sulfur odors were detected beyond Marathon's property line. AQD initially focused on the coker flare system, but upon further investigation, a broken pipe was discovered at the gas concentration unit. During normal conditions, steam is used to heat gas lines in this system. Due to the polar vortex conditions at the time of this incident, the units providing steam were shut down due to freeze-ups. The shutdown in turn caused what is called a dead leg, or a low point in a pipe, to accumulate water and eventually freeze. This is what is shown on the picture in the slide. The accumulating ice eventually caused the pipe to burst, therefore allowing gas to escape. This included hydrogen sulfide, which caused the odors. Additionally, when the gas recovery system was shut off to help get this issue under control, another malfunction caused additional odors. When the gas recovery system was shut off, the gas was rerouted to the coker flare to be burned. A plugged drain line in the coker flare increased the pressure of the gas routed to the flare. This resulted in the breach of a molecular seal in the equipment, and this resulted in the release of hydrogen sulfide and also mercaptans, which are an odorous gas. Monitoring of this incident showed that no air quality standards were exceeded, but community residents did experience significant effects from the odors. The odor threshold for hydrogen sulfide is very low, meaning that even at low concentrations, the odor from this gas can be noticeable, offensive, or cause odor-related health effects, such as those reported by community members. So the proposed consent order requires Marathon to follow a compliance program, which I'm going to go over in the next few slides. So to address the violations and prevent future violations from happening, Marathon must comply with their permit limits and relevant rules. This includes the following items. First, Marathon must comply with Rule 901. This is Michigan's nuisance odor rule that says any source of air emissions shall not cause unreasonable interference with the comfortable enjoyment of life and property. Marathon must also operate the Coker flare in compliance with Rule 910, which states that an air cleaning device must be installed, maintained, and operated in a satisfactory manner and in accordance with the air pollution control rules and law. Marathon must also comply with the particulate matter, hydrogen sulfide, and visible emission limits in their permit for the pieces of equipment that were at the source of the violations. Also, Marathon must comply with the specific conditions of the permit that were violated. This includes complying with the startup, shutdown, and malfunction plan for the fluid catalytic cracking unit, properly operating the continuous emission monitoring system for the Unifiner flare and the Coker flare, which monitors and records the hydrogen sulfide level in the refinery gas burned at these flares, and comply with the requirements that were violated for flare control devices, in this instance for the Coker flare. So continuing, two of the alleged violations were the result of failed performance tests for particulate matter on the crude vacuum heater and the Coker heater. As I addressed in the previous slide, to address these violations, Marathon must comply with the particulate matter emission limit for both of these heaters. For all performance tests, Marathon must submit and implement a test plan that will be reviewed and approved by AQD. If any of the test plans are insufficient, AQD will request that Marathon make changes before the plan will be approved. For the crude vacuum heater, Marathon will be required to conduct 2 annual performance tests demonstrating compliance with the particulate matter emission limit. Once Marathon demonstrates compliance with the particulate matter emission limit in 2 consecutive tests, they can return to the frequency of testing required in their permit. For the Coker heater, Marathon will test for compliance with the particulate matter emission limit upon any request from AQD. So Marathon must also update, implement, and/or develop multiple plans or procedures. Each of these plans and procedures will be reviewed by the AQD for approval. If any plan or procedure is insufficient, AQD will request that Marathon make changes before a plan is approved. In this slide and also in the next slide, I'll give an overview of each of the plans and procedures that we're requiring under the proposed consent order. First, Marathon will implement the activities involving online equipment, risk assessment, checklist, and approvals form. This will help Marathon better run their operations to prevent excess particulate matter emissions. Marathon will submit a preventative maintenance plan for the crude vacuum heater and the Coker heater. This will also help prevent excess particulate matter emissions. Marathon will also develop and implement a refining maintenance procedure for performing preventative maintenance on electrical equipment. Marathon will update and submit a startup, shutdown, and malfunction plan for the fluid catalytic cracking unit. This will minimize the time in which this unit operates on internal circulation or hot standby to minimize visible emissions exceedances during startup and shutdown. Also, Marathon will submit a plan to minimize analyzer downtime and SO2 emissions during steam outs before the next planned maintenance period that will require steam outs. This will also minimize the time in which Marathon is not able to continuously monitor hydrogen sulfide emissions through the continuous emission monitoring system. Marathon will submit an updated operations procedure for the coker flare, including a weekly verification of proper operation of the molecular seal drain, daily verification that the molecular seal drain is operating properly during temperatures below freezing, and a winterization plan. They will also develop and submit a post-incident community air monitoring and response plan, including procedures for determining when post-incident community air sampling is conducted, the radius of the monitored area, the data to be collected, the parameters to be measured, when further communication or action may be necessary to respond to an incident, as well as reporting results to the AQD and communicating results and information to the public. Marathon will also develop a refinery-wide winterization plan, including procedures for mitigating the effects of a loss of refinery steam supply. And once the proposed consent order is effective, AQD will monitor compliance with each of the compliance items that I have covered. And if AQD finds that Marathon is not following the compliance plan, Marathon will be liable for stipulated fines. So since this case was escalated to enforcement in January of 2018, Marathon has completed items that were previously required under the proposed consent order. Because these items were properly completed and verified by AQD, they were removed from the proposed consent order. So this includes between August of 2017 and October of 2019, Marathon conducted 6 separate performance tests on the crude vacuum heater. Each of these tests showed that Marathon was in compliance with the particulate matter emission limit for the crude vacuum heater. Marathon also passed a performance test on the coker heater in December of 2018. This test showed that Marathon was in compliance with the particulate matter emission limit for the coker heater. Marathon also installed a pressure transmitter in the coker flare. This pressure transmitter is capable of determining whether liquid is accumulating in the molecular seal. This will minimize the occurrence of another malfunction that could lead to an emissions or odor incident. Marathon also repaired the regulator on the natural gas feed to the auxiliary burner in the fluid catalytic cracking unit. This will help keep the proper operating velocity in the fluid catalytic cracking unit and will therefore help prevent visible emission exceedances. So next, I will talk about Marathon's penalty. The AQD uses EPA's penalty policy to calculate monetary penalties. Michigan's Supplemental Environmental Project policy also plays a role in this penalty calculation. The EPA's penalty policy lays out what the fine amount should be for each violation, and then those amounts are added up. The policy considers the actual or possible harm to the environment or public health and the importance to achieving the goals of the Clean Air Act and Michigan's air pollution control rules. To calculate the penalty, the policy evaluates the amount of pollutants that are emitted over the allowed permitted levels, the sensitivity of the environment, the toxicity of the pollutants, the length of the violations, and the size of the violator. In this case, AQD also considered the quality of the supplemental environmental projects. So once these appropriate factors were determined, an initial penalty amount was calculated from the penalty policy. That initial calculated penalty was offered to Marathon, and then we came to a final settlement. Factors such as litigation risk, the company's willingness to cooperate to resolve the violations, and Marathon's history of non-compliance were taken into account in determining this final settlement amount. Any company in enforcement also has the right to present additional factual information about the alleged violations that AQD can take into consideration when ultimately determining the final penalty. When completing a supplemental environmental project, any company who does this does get a mitigation credit from their penalty, but ultimately pays more money than if they were to settle without doing an environmental project. So in this case, if Marathon were to simply settle the case without doing a supplemental environmental project, the final penalty would be $275,000, and all of this money will go to the state of Michigan general fund. However, since Marathon chose to do 2 supplemental environmental projects, they will ultimately be paying $363,853, which is more than the final penalty. Marathon will be required under this proposed consent order to spend at least $282,000 for the supplemental environmental projects. Because Marathon is doing these projects, the Michigan Supplemental Environmental Project Policy allowed them to receive a mitigation credit towards the initial penalty. This is why the penalty that is going to the general fund is $81,853. The result of the supplemental environmental projects is that more money is now going to the benefit of the community that would have otherwise gone to the general fund. So for the final topic of the night, I'm going to talk about the 2 supplemental environmental projects that Marathon is going to complete as part of this proposed consent order. So first, what is a supplemental environmental project? This is an environmental or public health project that a company volunteers to do as part of a consent order. The project must go above and beyond what is required by law and provide added benefits to the community or environment that has been affected by the violations. For the first project, Marathon will spend at least $226,000 to retrofit an existing air handling system at the Mark Twain School for Scholars located at 12800 Visger Street in Detroit. The retrofit will include air conditioning, enhanced air filtration, and air purification using photohydroionization. Marathon will also pay for replacement filters and cells for the length of the proposed consent order, which is 5 years. This project will improve indoor air quality for the children and employees at the school. For the second project, Marathon will spend $56,000 to provide an online platform that will allow the public to see real-time data of the air quality at the perimeter of Marathon's refinery. This platform will allow the public to see data for carbon monoxide, particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, total reduced sulfur, and volatile organic compounds on the Detroit Refinery community website. So this is a map of the location of the supplemental environmental project at Mark Twain. On the left is a zoomed out map of the area. The small highlighted point is the location of the environmental project, which is at the school. You can see Marathon in the center of the map. And on the right is a picture of Mark Twain School, which is located to the east of I-75 and Marathon. So, and we know there's interest for when these projects will begin. So as detailed out in the project proposals, there are multiple steps to be completed before the air filtration system is up and running. First, a detailed engineering study must be completed, and this will happen on or before September 30th of this year. So this part of the project is going to take some time to complete. The school was built mostly in the 1950s, and there are no blueprints or drawings for the existing air handling systems. So for this reason, Marathon has to hire a contractor to map the existing system before they are able to determine what exact equipment they need to order, and also before they begin modifying the system. So after that engineering study is completed, the orders for all equipment will be placed on or before October 31st of this year. The wait time to receive this equipment is from the order is a few months. After that equipment is received, then construction will begin, and the mechanical completion and startup of the air filtration system will happen on or before August 31st of 2021. And again, once the air filtration system is up and running, Marathon will pay for replacement filters and the photohydroionization cells for the duration of the proposed consent order, which is 5 years. And for the second project, the online platform, this site is to be fully operational and available to the community by December 31st of this year. So that is my last talking point of the evening. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jen for the question and answer session.
All right, thanks a lot, Erin. I appreciate that. So we're going to go ahead and just talk again about how to ask a question. We do have some questions in already, so that's great. And if my panelists could turn their cameras on, that would also be wonderful. So just wanted to go over this one more time in case people had come in late. And we do have at least one person that's only called in. So I just want to make sure everybody knows how to ask the questions when they need to. So if you are submitting your question in writing, that is great. We're going to get to those questions first. You can go ahead and just send those into your question and answer box, which will be on the bottom of your screen. If you really feel like you want to voice your question aloud after we get to the written questions, we will go ahead and have you raise your hand, and then we'll unmute your line and you'll be able to speak. If you are calling in, you're going to just hit *9 on your phone, and that will raise your hand and we'll unmute you. And what we'll probably do for those is we're going to read off the last 4 digits of your telephone number. So just make sure you know what those are. I know sometimes with my cell phone, when people ask me my phone number, I'm like, what is it again? Because I don't call myself very often. All right. So we're at your question and answer, and I apologize for repeating that. Joe, just to go over again for anybody who might have been here a little bit late, we do have our panel. So you just heard from Erin Moran. She's in our enforcement unit, so she'll be answering questions related to a lot of the topics that she just talked about. If you have questions specifically about Marathon, how they're inspected, that kind of thing, George Acevedo is our inspector, and he's in our Detroit district office. Keisha Williams is in our toxics unit, so she would be able to talk a little bit about things like that. Susan Kilmer works in our air monitoring unit, and so she would be able to talk about things related to outdoor air quality monitoring in the area around Marathon and projects and things like that that we've done in that area. Erica Wolf works in our state implementation plan unit, so she would be able to talk about things like non-attainment rules, stuff like that that you guys might have questions about. So I will get to some of these questions. So one of the first questions that we got today, and I appreciate this question from you, Senator Chang, appreciate you being on the line today as well, is the question was, will the slides be emailed to everybody? And yes, definitely, as a follow-up to this meeting, if you registered and you submitted a email address that works, we will send you a follow-up email that will include a PDF of the slides we presented tonight, as well as a link to the recording of the meeting. And just to let you know about that recording, we do send that out to be transcribed. So if you know someone who has English as a second language, but maybe reads in Arabic or Spanish, once that is transcribed, YouTube will allow that to be translated, at least visually in writing on the screen. So if that's helpful and you know anybody that you would like to share that with that maybe wasn't able to participate tonight, that would be great. So the first question, Erin, is going to go to you. And this question is regarding the violations in the consent order. So the question was, why would we take more than one violation and roll it into only one consent agreement? Why aren't those handled separately? So if you could talk a little bit about that, that would be great.
Sure. So the reason that we roll the violations into one consent order is to, I guess, provide one settlement for the company. You know, every time we work through a consent order with the company, as you see in this case, it takes some time. So I guess piecemealing each violation into a different consent order, I think it becomes confusing for kind of everyone involved to know, you know, which one goes where. So when we can settle the violation through one consent order, we can, you know, incorporate all the violations together and have one plan for the company to follow to make sure that they're coming back into compliance. So I know one of the questions that we've received is, you know, why has this settlement agreement taken so long? And that's because as we were going through the course of working through this consent order, we were finding more violations in the, you know, at Marathon. So our policy and our program is to continue to roll these violations into one consent order so that we can settle it at once.
Okay, thank you. Another question related to the supplemental environmental projects. So one thing that I know you didn't really talk about, but we did get a question on was, how did we determine what supplemental environmental projects Marathon was going to do? So could you talk a little bit about the work that Marathon did with the community to kind of formulate those projects, and then how the approval process works as far as when they're interacting with you and the enforcement staff on whether those would be approvable or not?
Sure. So anytime a company enforcement wants to do a supplemental environmental project, it's up to them to develop the project and bring it to us. So as long as the project, kind of follows the guidelines in our supplemental environmental project policy, and it's a good project, and it's in the right area, we are going to approve it. Now, I know that Marathon did have a few meetings with the community. They went out and looked to see what the community wanted. So I do know that they consulted with multiple stakeholders in the development of these projects. Some of the ones I was told was Marathon's Community Advisory Panel, community representatives from 48217, representatives from Detroit City Council, Detroit Public Schools, and the Sierra Club. So I think the way this project came into fruition was, asking what the community wanted. So I think initially there are a few projects, but there's, so much money to delegate around to the different projects. And so these projects here were ones that the community was interested in, and they're ultimately the projects that Marathon finally proposed to us. So, we looked at these projects and rated them, with the supplemental environmental project policy, and approved the projects.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if I answered.
No, I think so. And if we can always do a follow-up if we need to on that as well. And I'm going to give you a break for a second because this next one's going to go to Susan. So Susan, I'm going to kind of give you a multi-part question. So I'm going to put a couple of these into one. You know how I like to do that to you. So I think a lot of the people that are listening are familiar with the fact that Marathon has their own air monitoring equipment around the perimeter of the facility. So a couple of questions came in related to that. The first one was, what are the locations of the air monitors that actually feed into our AQI, or our air quality index, our system for Eagle? And then the second part of that, is there a way to incorporate Marathon's data into that My Air portal? So if you could talk a little bit about that, I'd really appreciate it.
Sure. So Eagle does have several air monitoring stations that are near Marathon that feed into our website, where you can see that air quality index of real-time air pollution. And those stations are in Dearborn. We have a station in 48217 at New Mount Hermon Church. We have one at Trinity St. Mark's, which is on West 4th Street near Woodmere. One that is close to the former Southwestern High School. We have one that's located in Military Park. Again, this is in Delray, a little bit north. And then one at the Detroit Precinct, Detroit 4th Precinct facility. So there's, I guess, 6 or 7 different monitors in the area that are feeding into the real-time air quality website. And that would show and post that air quality index. For Marathon, as you said, they do have 4 perimeter air monitoring stations, as they call them. 3 of those stations are on the property of Marathon, and 3 of them are kind of labeled this way. One is called One North, and that is by Oakwood. Another one is called 2 West. That's located on Schaefer and Dix, again, but still on Marathon's property. One is called 4 East, and that is, again, on their property, but it's along 4th Street by Pleasant. And then the 4th air monitoring station that is operated by Marathon, but it's actually by a contractor that's hired by Marathon, is located at the Mark Twain School off Fort Street to the south. So those 4 are operated by the contractor that is hired by Marathon. Part of the question also was, can the data from Marathon Station feed into our website? I think logistically, we're not really able to do that at this time, but as part of the Supplemental Environmental Project, they will be posting the data from these 4 monitoring stations on their own Marathon website. So it's my understanding we'll be able to see their data in real time, and that's a new thing. And I think that'll be useful to the community as well as to Eagle.
So it won't be incorporated with ours, but it will at least be visually available in more of a real-time setting. That's our understanding. So thinking about this as you were talking about where the monitors are, I know we have a map of this, and I know I can't find it like that, like I would like to. It was silly to not have it, so I apologize. What I'll do is I will just add that onto the things that we send to all of you after this. We'll send you a link to the AQI where you can see those monitors on a map decently, and then we'll also send you the map that includes the Marathon ones, because I know we have that. And I apologize, my dog is drinking very loudly in the background right now, so if you can hear that, I apologize.
Yep, and I can send that to you, Jen. Okay,
perfect. That would be great, Susan. I'd like to put that all in one email together to folks. So this question goes back to Erin. Erin, I think you mentioned this, but I guess I just want to make sure that we're being very clear about it. You had mentioned that Marathon would be responsible for the long-term maintenance of the air filtration system at Mark Twain. So can you just talk a little bit again about how long that maintenance period will be? And then this wasn't asked, but I think it's kind of inferred, what happens after that? If you know, and you might not have an answer to that question.
So, you know, the system is going to be put in, and one of the things that we worked out in this agreement was that Marathon would pay for the replacement of the filters in the cells, which need to be replaced between every 6 months and I think a year or 2. And so that is going to last through the duration of the consent order, which is 5 years. So there'll be a few replacements for that. As for after that, that is something that we did take into account when, you know, working through this project. And so we did involve the Detroit Public Schools and some people from there, because we wanted to make sure that Detroit Public Schools and this school could maintain and pay for this air filtration system into the future. So we did get that support. If you're, you know, looking at through the packet of information that is online, we do have a letter of support from the Detroit Public Schools superintendent. That is a letter of support for this project. So the message that we got from the school is that they will be able to maintain this, you know, air filtration system into the future.
Okay, so and related to that, not specifically related to that, but related to air filtration system at schools. So the comment was, it's kind of a comment question, and it says that infiltration project is only being done at one of the school, which might be one of the further away from Marathon than some other ones. So was there any talk about implementing a system like this in all the schools around Marathon, or schools that are closer to Marathon? Do you have any information about that at all, Erin?
As far as the development of this project, you know, Eagle and AQD can't direct, you know, what project that is going to happen or where the funds will go. So that has to come to us from the company or from Marathon. So, I mean, when they talked with the community, this is the school that they came up with. I'm not sure on our end if other schools were discussed. But, you know, it's possible in the future, you know, if this air filtration system works, you know, it's possible to look through, hopefully to look at this project as a model and something that may be able to go into schools in the future as well. And that's what we're hoping, is that this is a good project that the community likes and will provide a good benefit for.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Peer pressure is a good thing sometimes, and I think that could be a little bit used in this case. Definitely if it works out, other people might want to hop on board with that. And this kind of leads into this next question. And
Can I make one
Keisha,
more point?
oh yeah, go ahead, sure.
Sorry. So I think, you know, as you can see in this project as well, it's a pretty costly project. So, you know, if you're going to do this in every school, it's going to, you know, rack up a lot of dollars. So I think starting with one school is, you know, what is able to be done through this project.
Yeah, and then how can we assess whether, and when I say we, I don't necessarily mean Eagle, and this kind of goes to that next question, is how, is there going to be any sort of assessment done on students? So Keisha, I don't know if you could talk a little bit about this, and just because I think maybe you might have heard some ramblings or some talk about this, but the question was whether or not there's any community health studies that are planned to monitor the students or employees' health at Mark Twain before and after the installation. And you might not necessarily know specifically about that, but if you've heard anything that you'd be willing to speak on.
I think that's a great question. I haven't heard anything to the best of my knowledge. I'm not sure if that's being planned. That's a really great question.
Yeah, and we could, you know, that's something that we can try to follow up on as well. And this next question is also for you. The question is asking, you know, is there going to be any, and it kind of goes along with the health study, but they're asking more of a, is there any analysis of the cumulative effects of the emissions in the area rather than the individual monitoring? So I know we've done the 48217 monitoring. So I don't know if you can talk a little bit about that and anything else that you think might be valuable.
Yeah, there have been a few studies that look at cumulative exposure risk. And so this is looking at the pollutants that someone might breathe and considering how they might be considered together, not individually, that sort of thing. And so very much at the heart of that question. At the same time, it may not be the cumulative impact assessment that some think of in regards to as all types of stressors in terms of pollutant stressors as well as non-pollutant stressors, things like racial disparities or income inequalities. But the cumulative exposure risk assessments that have been done include things like the 48217 report that looked at pollutants that were being monitored in the zip code at a community-driven air monitoring site. There have also been reports done at the national level that include zip code and local specific information, things like the National Air Toxics Assessment. And then there's information that is being monitored in more of a combined pollutant type of way at Marathon as well. And so an example of that would be like the total reduced sulfur, where it's not just looking at one pollutant, it's not just looking at hydrogen sulfide, but it's looking at hydrogen sulfide and other sulfur containing pollutants like mercaptans. And so as far as cumulative exposure assessments, there have been a few that have been done in the area that give us an idea of the air quality.
Yeah, so as a follow-up to that, would you be okay with people contacting you if they wanted information or links to these specific studies that you just kind of mentioned? Awesome. Yeah. So we'll be sharing contact information for all the panelists at the end of the day today. There was another question that was kind of in that question, but is more related to something that Susan, I think, might be able to answer. And Susan, I apologize if you answered this and I'm asking you again, but I would just want to make sure that we do answer it again for clarity. So the question was, is Marathon monitoring for PM10 only, PM10 2.5 only, or for both of those?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I do know. So the perimeter monitoring that's being done by Marathon's contractor, they are monitoring for PM10, so it's that size fraction, and it's being monitored continuously. So 24/7, they're reading numbers. At our nearby Eagle sites, we are doing a fair amount of PM 2.5 monitoring. Some of that is in real time. Some of that is filter based, where the filter actually has to go to a laboratory. And then we do have a site in Dearborn that is monitoring PM10 continuously 24/7. And then we have a monitoring site at the former Southwestern High School location where that is measuring PM10, but it's on a filter and it goes to a lab. And so that's every 6 days. So at the Eagle sites, we have kind of a combination of some PM10 sampling, but a lot of PM2.5, whereas the Marathon sites are PM10.
Okay. I knew you would know the answer to that, so I'm glad. I'm glad you're here tonight because I wouldn't have been able to remember all those. Erin, this question is going back to you. So there was a question about whether or not a specific violation was included in this consent order. And it was an incident that happened September 12th, 2019. And the asker did not see that in the consent list of violations in the consent agreement, the proposed consent order. Could you speak to that, if that one is actually in there and we missed it, or if it's not in there, and if so, if and it's not, that is not a word, maybe not up here anyway. If it's not, why isn't it included?
Sure. So I think I'll give what I think, and then I'll probably call on George for some backup. So if I remember correctly, that incident was the one where Marathon employees were evacuated from the facility, if that's the one I'm remembering. I think from what I know, we did not, I think, necessarily find air quality violations or write a violation notice for that. But George, if you have anything to add, that might be helpful.
Yeah, Erin, that particular incident that occurred in September of 2019 with regards to the vapor leak. So we did have sort of an indirect violation that was cited because, you know, once the vapor leak occurred, there was a shutdown that happened right after. And then during startup of the fluidized catalytic cracking unit, there was a process violation. And so the violation really goes back to the cyclone and the inlet velocity. And so this is the one violation that we resolved by, this one was resolved by getting the new regulator in the FCCU to make sure that the airflow in the cyclone was meeting the inlet velocity.
Okay.
And we
So
do
sorry, go ahead.
for that. Well, that violation didn't result, I think, in a violation notice, if that's correct, George. You know, we do have provisions for the inlet velocity and the fluid catalytic cracking unit within the consent order. So you're going to have to, you know, run that unit correctly, basically, under this proposed consent order.
Did you have anything else you wanted to add to that, George?
No, that was it.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure you guys felt like you were answering that question. And if that wasn't clear, then please let us know in the question box there. Okay, so this is a good question, and I don't know if you can speak to this, Erin, or not, but the question is, the air filtration, air purification, air conditioning units that were chosen by Marathon, how do we know that this was the best available technology and will give the maximum protection to clean the air at the school? Was there any sort of justification that Marathon gave us when they were presenting this to us that might have provided some of that information?
Sure. So, I mean, while I'm not an expert on air handling units or air conditioning units, from what we, you know, have discussed while, you know, going through the proposing of this project and what, you know, is in the project description, it is a significant upgrade from what the school currently has. So right now the air filtration system is from 1950. It provides heating in the winter, but there's no air conditioning in the summer. So I think that probably means, you know, in the summer, you know, when it's hot out, you know, the windows are open, and that means that, you know, particulate matter and anything else that's in the outside air is going to come inside. So I'm just looking here at the project description. Right now, the filters currently installed are called, so let me back up a bit. There's different levels of filters, and they're called MERV, M-E-R-V filters. I found that Wikipedia has a pretty good description of what these filters are. And, you know, the higher the number of the filter, the better they are at, you know, filtering out particles. So currently the school has MERV 4 filters, and that has a less than 20% efficiency and an arrestance rating, which I believe is, you know, how much it captures the particles. That's 75 to 80%. Okay, sorry. It's a measure of the ability of an air filtration device to remove dust from the air. And so the filtration system that they're putting in is a 2-stage system. So there's going to be a filter on the fresh air intake that is going to use a MERV 8 filter. So that's a higher number than the current filter. So there's going to be, I don't know if you can see my hands, the air is going to be coming in through this filter first, and that is going to be the initial filter. And that has the arrestance rating of greater than 90%. And then there will also be a 2nd stage filter on the other side of that that uses a MERV 12/13. And that will remove 95% of the airborne particles in the submicron range and has a 70 to 75% efficiency. So that's already, you know, a better technology than the current filters that the school has. Also, they're installing this photo hydroionization system. And so what this system is supposed to do is it uses UV light to react with a sort of metallic plate on in this device, and that, I guess, through chemistry is going to, I guess, remove any, you know, microbes, bacteria, viruses in the air and odors and mold, hopefully, and clean the air better to provide better indoor air quality for, you know, the students and workers. So
Erin, follow-up question to what you're describing, because I'm kind of picturing it in my head, but my question is, as part of the Supplemental Environmental Project that Marathon submitted to us, was there a diagram like you're describing that could be shared, either is already shared, maybe it's already on the website with the rest of the documentation, or once the proposed consent order becomes final, would that be something that that we would be able to share? So for people who are really interested in sort of the science of how this filtration system is supposed to work, they could actually look at a diagram of it. Is that available or no?
Right now, we don't have something available like that, but that's a good idea. I think that's something that if we go back to Marathon, they might be able to provide us something like that. So I'll take that note and see if we can come up with something and then add it to the materials on the website.
I think that's a good idea, because I think some of these things, I mean, obviously, I mean, maybe there is an HVAC expert listening right now, but most of us probably are not. So seeing something like that and kind of being able to visualize how it might work at the school, I think is really important. And yeah, so when we get that, people that are online will either share it and send you an email and let you know that it's there, or we'll send you a link to it if we can get something like that for sure. So Erin, I didn't mean to cut you off. I apologize if you had something else to add, but I just was kind of thinking that might be a valuable piece of information for people. Okay, awesome. All right, so this question is going to go to you, George. It says, the odors have been a problem for a really long time, and it's rare that Marathon is held accountable. Is there a common thread that you have seen between all the odor violations? Is it human error? Is it equipment malfunctioning? Is it a specific piece of equipment? Can you just talk a little bit about that for me, please?
Yeah, so for odors, and under the state rules, we call it the nuisance rules, or Rule 901. So, you know, there's a variety of reasons why, you know, odors occur. It could be human error, you know, equipment malfunctioning. It just really depends on the situation. I don't know if we have like data to back up that, you know, one thing causes the most odors, but from a field perspective, I mean, we take in odor complaints. You know, we have the PEAS line now that, the people can call during the off hours or during the weekends. And so we sort of, when we get those, we try to get to them as soon as possible. You know, it's not always logistically possible that we go investigate the odors, just because of you know, we might not be available at that time. But when we go out and investigate odors, usually we're looking at the intensity, the duration, the frequency, to figure out whether that incident or group of incidents contribute to a nuisance violation. So as far as like, and you know, sometimes we get the complaint that, oh, I'm driving by the bridge, I'm driving over the bridge and it smells. Legally, it's hard for us to cite a company based on someone driving by the facility. So it has to be an odor where you're encountering at your house or you're encountering at your place of business. And for us, you know, to cite a company, we have to physically observe it. So that's why we encourage people to call us or keep a log, so that if you're noticing a particular odor, you know, we can maybe look at that data of your log to determine whether there's a pattern. But, you know, I know it's frustrating for the public when they call us and we're not able to get out there, or we get out there and the odor stops or whatever. But I mean, we do encourage people to call us and to continue to call us if there are issues.
Yeah, I think it's, from being an inspector, I can concur with you on, if there's nothing more frustrating for a resident to be experiencing odor issues and not be able to figure out where it's coming from and have to keep calling. But it really is the best way for us to be able to hold a company accountable for odor issues that they're causing, is that duration, intensity, and frequency of those odors. So I don't know, at least based on what you said, George, that there isn't a like one common factor in all of that, but we have the Rule 901 for a reason, and it's just a little bit more challenging sometimes for us to implement. This is a great question, and this one's going to go to you, Aaron. The question is it under Eagle's purview to decide to give the monetary fine back to the community rather than it going into the general fund? So we do get asked that question a lot. It's a really, really good question. So if you can speak to that a minute, I'd appreciate it.
I mean, I think, as I've said a few times before, it's up to the company whether or not they want to pursue a supplemental environmental project. Eagle and AQD, we encourage these projects. I think we'd like the money to go back to the community. Now, what's written in our laws and statutes is that unless there's a supplemental environmental project, the money has to go to the general fund. So yeah, we like supplemental environmental projects. We want to promote them as much as possible, but we aren't able to, demand or force a company to do these projects to put the money back into the community ultimately.
So we have a few more questions here. I wanted to get to one. There was one good one, but I feel like we might not have quite the right people on our panel at this point to answer the question fully, but I'm going to just read it, and I think we might have to get back to you on the start of this one. So this part is the one that I'm not sure, maybe someone can talk to this a little bit, and if one of the panel members feels very comfortable, that's fine, let me know, but I think we might have to get our expert in to kind of talk about the frequency of this. So the question was that we had mentioned a thermal inversion happening with the polar vortex stuff going on. So the question was, I was wondering if you are seeing thermal inversion issues increasing across the state related to air quality violations, and if there's any way to address this directly in the consent order or changes to a permit. So that's a really good question. Does anybody feel like they have the expertise to be able to answer that? I know we have people in our office, but I just don't know if we have them online right now with us. Okay, I kind of thought that. We'll try to answer that question. Maybe we'll get an answer and include it in that follow-up email, because that is a really, really good question. A couple other ones coming in. I appreciate it. Here, this is a longer one, so I'm going to, this is actually kind of more of a comment. One of our attendees that's on says, Eagle works closely with EPA and the city of Detroit. If there's problems at the refinery, EPA emergency response, Eagle and Detroit Homeland Security will respond to ensure protection of the community. So that's a comment that was put in by one of our attendees here. This is a comment, I think, about the photohydroionization. So it says, I've received some information from someone with expertise regarding the photohydroionization. There is no peer review literature recommendation from ASHREA, maybe you say that, Ashri, EPA, or anyone credible about this system, which is about $18,000 in the SEP budget. Some of these systems are actually harmful as they produce new chemicals. These systems have been used to kill pathogens on food, but similar systems have produced ozone, PM, odors, and other problems. It is unclear what, if anything, the system would do given the potential light VOCs and other VOCs that might be at higher concentrations in this area due to the tank farm and the refinery emissions. So thank you so much for that comment. We appreciate it. And Aaron, I will just make sure that Aaron, you get that specifically so that you can pass that forward to those who need to hear it. So that is all of the questions that I have right now, at least in writing. So I was going to open that up to anybody who would like to raise their hand. I did still want to talk to people about when we're going to be having the actual informational session and public hearing and how you can submit a comment. But I wanted to make sure if people did have other questions and they wanted to raise their hands to speak out loud. And we do have one question. So Ms. Landrum, hold on one second and I will unmute your line here. You should be unmuted. So whenever you would like to ask your question, go right ahead.
I wanted to know, since it was said that it must go into the general fund, is that written policy or law? And if so, or if not, how can that be changed?
That's a great question. Aaron, do you want to speak to that, if whether or not it's in the law, and then if we wanted to implement change on that, how would we get that done?
It is written into the law, and to change that, I think that law would have to go through the legislature. I know that I think in the last enforcement hearing that we had for USD, I believe Ms. Landrum, you were there as well, and it was mentioned that Senator Chang's bills is looking to kind of change that so that money that is taken from enforcement can be put to the public and not go to the general fund. But that is something that has to go through the legislature.
Ms. Landrum, did you have a follow-up on that? I just want to make sure that I don't cut you off.
No, that was clarified.
All right, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Anyone else want to speak a question out loud? Otherwise, we might just move on here, and we still have a little bit of time. We're not on any super time crunch or anything, but I want to make sure that we get your questions answered. All right. So if you've been at any meetings with me, you know I like to dilly-dally a little bit on this last part in case any questions come up towards the end. But just talking to you a little bit about how you can submit a comment. So we have several different ways that this can be done. You can submit your comment in writing. You can do that in two different ways. You can send that into Aaron in our enforcement unit. And because we do have a couple of people just listening in online, I'm going to go ahead and read that address. So if you are listening online, or not online, I'm sorry, on the phone, and you want to jot this down, feel free. Otherwise, you can find it on our website as well. But you can send your comment directly to Erin Moran, and her first name is E-R-I-N, and her last name is Moran. It's M as in Mary, O as in octopus, R as in red, A as in apple, N as in Nancy. And that's at our enforcement unit at Eagle Air Quality Division, and it's P.O. Box 30260. It's Lansing, Michigan, and the zip code is 48909. You can also send your comment directly by email to Erin, and her email address is morane@michigan.gov. So that's M as in Mary, O as in octopus, R as in red, A as in apple, N as in Nancy, E as in elephant, at Michigan, all spelled out, .gov as in government. You can also call and leave your comment by voicemail. And I'm going to have a little bit of a confession here. We haven't had anybody in any of the things lately leave any comments by voicemail. So we're kind of hoping that somebody tries it. So if you're feeling up to it, you can always call our voicemail line, which is area code 517-284-0900. And you would just leave a voicemail and we would transcribe your comment for the record. So I'm putting up on the screen right now who you can contact if you have further questions. And this is basically the panel members. And like I had said before, we will be sending a copy of these slides out to everyone after, during the follow-up email. So anyone who put it in a valid email address will get that follow-up. Our public hearing will be on September 2nd. So if you wanted to participate in that, we're going to do a similar thing in case we have people that weren't able to participate in this meeting. We're going to do a short informational session, and then we'll open up the meeting for official public comment on the record. That will start at 7 o'clock, or once the question and answer period is done, whichever comes sooner. So if you're kind of planning for things there. It looks like we might have got a couple other questions in, so I just want to check really quick here. Let me see. Oh yes, I can definitely repeat that phone number. So the voicemail number is area code 517-284-0900. So, and I have that memorized. And like I said, I really want somebody to try to use it. So, and yes, the recording will be on YouTube. And if you just search Marathon, if you go to the Eagle YouTube site, which is, oh, I'm going to get this wrong, Ms. Landrum. I think it's just YouTube/Eagle. But if you go to YouTube and you search EGLE, Eagle, you'll find our YouTube page. And if you just search Marathon on there, you'll find it. Again, it will take a few days to get it transcribed and be ready for posting for anyone who might need those transcriptions on there. But we will post that, and I will definitely send an email to all of you that have been participating tonight to let you know when that's actually ready. Michigan Eagle is our YouTube page. Thank you, Matt. He's phoning a friend for me right now, so I appreciate that. These are my coworkers making sure I'm keeping you guys up to speed and saying all the right things here. So that being said, we greatly appreciate your time and efforts tonight. We really appreciate the questions. I know it was a lot of information tonight for sure. So if you have further questions as time goes on, please feel free to send them to us. The public comment period is being kept open for an extended period of time because we know the situation right now is not perfect for everyone, so we want to make sure we give you ample opportunity to submit those comments and get your questions answered so that you feel you can submit a comment that makes sense for you and is meaningful. That being said, I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting tonight. So again, I greatly appreciate your time and energy, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening.